Today is meant to basically consist of two sections. One is going to be co-facilitated by our good friends and clients, Paul Muir with Manitoulin-Sudbury Paramedic Service, and Seamus Murphy with Cochrane District, is it EMS or Paramedic Service, either way. So thank you guys so much for your participation. They're going to do a good job of introducing their topics and cover those off, and then we're going to get into the second section, which is meant to be a conversation about where we go from here, given the scenario with COVID, and what are the anticipated steps we have to take today to position ourselves for success sort of tomorrow and in the short and long run. So hopefully you guys will have lots of thoughts on that. So with that, thank you all again so much, and I am going to go ahead and make Paul Muir our presenter. Very quickly, I asked both Paul and Seamus if they were doing some cool stuff because of the fact that they've got some of Interdev's technologies embedded in their processes, and given that they have recently gone through training and recruitment using the application, if they might want to share some of those details with us, and they very eagerly and politely accepted. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Emily. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
And can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Those checks are always our new normal. So thanks very much to Emily and the team at Interdev for this opportunity, and thanks everyone for making some time this afternoon to come and talk about our circumstance. So I think it's important that, well, two things. That I'm going to try and be brief because those of you who know me out there know that one, I don't like attention, and two, I don't like talking. So I have to keep this to about 10 minutes. So I want to preface this by really demonstrating what our circumstance is. So we are a rural remote service, and it'll probably give you a little bit of insight onto why we took the path that we took with the remote assessment process that we undertook with our friends at Interdev. Truth be told, my chief, Robert Smith, had asked me a while ago, inquired and saying, so Rob's position was anything that should be automated or could be automated should be automated, just to relieve some workflow issues. And I was a little bit of a laggard on this, only because my protectionism attitude and trying to protect the integrity of written exams and the work involved with updating those exams. So once the pandemic hit, it kind of forced my hand to start getting with the times and to evolve my thinking. And thankfully, Chirag, Kathy, Mark, and the whole team at Interdev were so accommodating in getting this to post off. So I'm going to explain a little bit about our circumstance, just to give you an idea of what we're about and what our legacy process was, and what our way forward is. So Manitoulin Paramedic Services, PCP IV service, we have 12 stations, 23 ambulances, 2 PRUs deployed over 40,000 square kilometers. Big, huge geographic area, sparsely populated, not as big as our friends in Cochrane and Timmins, however, it's a large area. We employ 138 paramedics, 78 are full-time. We have 4 full-time paramedic superintendents, 56 of our staff are part-time. We serve 18 municipalities and 1 unorganized township. Our population is a little bit deceiving by the book. It's approximately 35,000 calls per year. However, during our peak summer months, especially on the island, that population can triple. Call volumes just over 9,000 calls per year. So really numbers wise, we can't compare to our large urban friends. However, our time on task certainly is the real definer of our workload. So our calls can last 2-3 hours. So we have prolonged exposure with our patients. Our headquarters is in the great metropolis of Espanola, where we have a population of about 5,000. And our annual hiring cycle, this is my 4th hiring cycle with Manitoulin-Sudbury Paramedic Services, and we've averaged to be about 7. So this year we're going to be hiring 6. Got to move this up. So here's a map of our area. And again, I just wanted to give everybody an understanding of what our circumstances are. So the orange crosses there, of course, are ambulance stations, and the blue crosses are our first response stations. Just to highlight, the Cartier and French River Delta first response teams no longer exist, so we do have some gaps in our response there. So this is really truly a good depiction of why our sudden cardiac arrest response times wouldn't be awesome. We are geographically challenged to meet a lot of those times. Another takeaway from this slide here is if you look at Killarney, which are one of our southernmost tip stations, and if we go to our northernmost tip, which would be Chapleau, it's about 511 kilometers, or a 7-hour drive. So that should, just to give you an example of sheer magnitude and size of our geography. So jumping into what our legacy recruitment entrance exam looked like and what it involved. So it was an in-person session in Espanola. So we had 2 invigilators on site usually, depending on the numbers could increase. We had 2 admin staff full-time dedicated to the hiring process. We use a lot of paper, a lot of ink, a lot of and pencils. So you can imagine having a 75 question multiple choice exam for 70 candidates represented a lot of materials. We had to rent a hall because our facility can't accommodate that number of people, and the hall rentals in the greater metropolis of Espanola are a little bit limited. So we had to go to the big Legion there. That's where we'd rent that stuff in. And just a little comment here, all of those tests had to be manually corrected. So once we retrieved the answer keys, we would sit down for several hours, if not a day, to manually correct the exam. So with the pandemic and seeing our peak summer vacation season was coming, we'd had some attrition, we'd had some retirements, and we'd had some long-term disability depart and be separated from our service. So our assessment revealed that we needed to get some new employees in place fairly quickly. So started to game this out, met with the chief and the other deputy, and made a decision to move forward on a hiring process. Now, with the pandemic and the emergency declaration, physical in-person exam was not possible. There's no way that we could ever guarantee the 2-meter or 6-foot distance between folks. So this presented us with a challenge. So luckily, we'd had some brief conversations with Chirag on recruitment processes, what that would look like, and if an online exam process was a possibility. And Chirag was very, very quick to say, of course, absolutely, let's set some time and discuss what your needs are. So we gamed this out and really, truly put it all in Chirag's hands, and they took the ball and ran with it. Now, we did a fee for service just because of time crunch. I had asked if they could populate the exam and manage everything to do with the exam, which they graciously did. And that turned around really, and Mark, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably within 24 hours, we had all ducks in order and ready to go to pull the trigger on this thing. So that was amazing on its own. So what did it look like? So Interdev handled all our candidate notification and enrollment. So what this meant is that a generic email was sent to all of the candidates that we had moved through the HR process and shortlisting to challenge the exam. I provided that information to Interdev. Interdev then notified the candidates via email and provided instructions on how to access certain and what the steps were going to be for the exam, including time limits and what the expectations were. They provided real-time technical support. So this was really out of my hands. And we'll talk about workload and workflow expectations, especially during a pandemic situation. But this was really a relief for us and a true benefit. So if anything went wrong, any glitch with technology, Interdev was on call and ready to take care of it. The other thing that's we had real-time data tracking, and I'll talk about that and the value and the importance of that in some slides to follow. Of course, I didn't have to manually correct these exams anymore. The minute the candidates submitted the exam, we had instantaneous results, and the results were accessible, they're validated, and certainly interpretable. And while we were developing the exam and I was able to go in and test it, all the behaviors on the questions were easily established. We were able to put rules in there, what we wanted, and if we needed to tweak, it was quite easily to manage that piece. So here's a copy of what the email invitation came from Interdev. Just I changed some of the surface characteristics of it, but really, truly, it's just to give you your mind's eye on what this looked like. Certainly, the exam went a little longer down past steps. This part here, I don't know if you see my cursor. Steps to take the exam. It outlined everything, but just to show how visually, as a candidate, all the information was there in a very succinct email. So let's look on. So we had 24 candidates challenge the exam, and here's some of the instantaneous data that I was talking about. So, the exam, it was 75 questions. So based on that, each question would be worth 0.13 marks. And then the certain itself puts the grade on 10. And this gave me a quick view on how the candidates score, how long it took them to write the exam, when they logged in, all of those things that may trigger some anxieties in some of you who are like me, are a little bit control freaks when it comes to testing. That, were they taking screenshots? Were they researching the answers? All of that could easily, all my anxieties, or it could be confirmed or denied or refuted just by looking at the time it took for most folks to write the exam. So quickly here, I was able to see how the candidate scored. I'll move on to the next slide just to show you the average score. So we use this to set our cut score as well. So, I mean, you can go through a modified Angoff cut score exercise, but that those of you online are probably aware that that's a long process and resource intensive. Or you can have, the technology do it for you, and they did it here. So the average of the class was 72. That you can use that methodology, or what was nice with this, I'll show you the next slide, is that you could do what I call the hockey draft type of mentality. So your top 15 candidates are the ones that move on to your interview process. Now, another valuable thing, element down here, if you see that each one of the questions were ranked. So you can see that 0.13. So these 3 questions here, all 24 candidates got corrected or got right. So that tells me that the question is probably easy. As I go down, if I get to closer to 0 or 1, the question gets harder. Some of the questions we saw, the candidates, it was 0. We had nobody got it right. So it's not necessarily something wrong with the candidate, but probably something wrong with the test item. So someone like me values this type of information because now I can go back, remove that question, or retool the question. There's something in that question that caused all the candidates to get it wrong. Now, I'm of the belief that we should be assessing the candidates' knowledge, judgment, critical decision-making skills. Those are the things that I like to do, not necessarily their recall. And I don't believe that we should be testing candidates' ability to be tested. So my philosophy is that every one of these answers have one right question, or one right answer, forgive me, 3 distractors. So it's simple. There's one right answer, 3 distractors, that's it. It's not A or B, A, B, C, or D, A, C, D, 3, like all those AMCA type exams. I don't find that that really gives me a good, accurate picture on people's knowledge. I find that that's a reading a test or a ability to be tested test. Hopefully that makes sense, everyone. So here's another visual. For those of you that are visual folks, on where the cut score would probably exist. So somewhere between 70 and 72. You see the majority of the folks scored between 70 and 75% on this exam, and of course the upper echelon between 75 and 80 and 85. Sorry. So this was very useful to bring to the chief and say, okay, so here's our cut score. Here's how many people should move on to the next phase of the hiring process. Again, you could use the NHL draft format or the cut score methodology. Each one of those are depending on how many people you're hiring. For our circumstance, we're looking at up to 10 candidates to be hired. We generally move 20 from the first 24. We try to move 20 forward. It ended up that we ended up moving 14 based on the data that we received from certain. This just another neat thing that the software gives you is a quick view on the performance. If you look at the right side of the screen here, if that's visible, I know the slide's a little bit grainy, I apologize. But during for the quiz navigation, I can easily tell, well, obviously which questions they got right, which ones they got wrong. Now, I could click on that and it brings me right to the question. I'm able to figure out their answer. What was interesting with this exercise was that new college grads, this look was similar to each other, where I had seasoned paramedics applying for the job and their questions that they got wrong were very similar. So that was quite interesting to observe. This is, if you're looking at this slide here, it's, if I were going to, I'm going to try. So if I were to click on a question, one of the wrong questions here, that's what would come up. So I'm able to see the question, I'm able to see what the candidate answered, and whether it was correct or not. And then, of course, all of the information about them completing their exam. So that is all of my time. Some of the takeaways that I like to bring to the table is a pro and cons approach for this. This might not be a good solution for everyone, especially those who are adequately resourced to do this stuff. I know some of you folks around the province are going to be sick of hearing how the northern services are disadvantaged or under-resourced, but it's truly, this is actually a game changer for our organization, because we don't have an education department, we don't have facilitators, we don't even have a commander hierarchy. We only go from deputy chiefs to our frontline superintendents. So this stuff was done all by me. So this really changed our game and how we approach our recruitment process. So the pros, it was easy peasy. Again, to reiterate, Chirag and his team were amazing in operationalizing this exam in a short period of time. I'll tell you, it's very cost effective, perhaps even some savings. We did a fee for service for them to populate the exam, which, for us represented probably cost neutral. But certainly if you did all of that work in-house, would represent most likely some savings. It was very stress-free. The process was agile. The data, which those of you who are data geeks like me out there, can be easily exported, validated, and it's easily interpretable, so I can report to the chief on performance. We've had a lot of positive feedback, actually 100% positive feedback from the candidates that moved on to the interview process. One of the questions asked was, how was their take on a remote exam? And it was really minimal time investment. So that, for me, allowed me to focus on dealing with the pandemic issues that we were dealing at the time and other things that occupy my daily workflows. The cons. So of course, you heard me talk about it before, the exam integrity is always a concern. We know that once you put something out there, it's out there. So it's vulnerable to screenshots, to people, having other folks in the room writing the questions down. Those are things that gave me pause, but we're not deal breakers in this circumstance. The obvious threats, there's no way to establish if the candidates are alone or if they're writing together. There's no way to establish whether or not they're researching answers. However, you could probably make some assumptions based on how long it took them to write the exam. And the reason we gave, 90 minutes to do 75 questions certainly was based on that fact, to limit how many minutes a candidate can spend on a question. and go and research and perhaps look at the books. And then, you know, is it the candidate themselves writing the exam? I'd like to think it wasn't, but that question has to be there. We have to have that moment of honesty. And the last con is really with technology, you have to be aware of the glitch. We had one minor glitch, which was rectified within 30 minutes. And I'll quick with that is, you know, the exams were submitted. We had accommodated one person that for personal reasons couldn't attend the day for the exam writings, which we accommodated. It was justifiable. So we had 2 sessions. We had one mass write sessions where 23 wrote, one wrote the next day. Something had changed because you know, I had gone in and done some changes on the exam before it was deployed, and they reverted it to the previous one. And I called Schrag and said, hey, something happened, and it was rectified within minutes. So there are always some technological limitations to something like this. There are always threats out there, but quite honestly, this was in my experience, a really, really, really good way to do business, a good efficient way to do business, and to get us our candidate list. So with that, I went a little over, but happy to take any questions.
So do we have questions for Paul? Okay, hearing none, perhaps you'll think of some and we can share some Q&A with Seamus after Seamus gives his presentation. So thank you very much, Paul. Once you have your paramedics tested and they've been recruited, of course, we have to share information with them, and respective of COVID, this is what Seamus is going to share with us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'll try not to be as long-winded as Paul. Just got to throw that dagger at you, buddy. Anyway, so I'm here to talk about Cochrane District, and Emily posed the question to me is, how do we keep our staff updated? How do we, what are we going to be doing in the future for learning processes, stuff like that. So I'm going to talk a bit about that today. The other thing that I want to say as well is that we've been doing this for a while, but with the COVID, there's been some changes. So we'll just get into it. So what do we want to do? Keep our paramedics updated. And of course, I'm certain, are you? So just to talk about the Cochrane District in itself, our catchment area. So our geographic area is 140,000 kilometers, consisting of about 8 bases throughout the district. So that's our whole district area. We have 20 ambulances, 3 PRUs that are staffed by commanders and or acting commanders. We have 100 paramedics and support staff. Presently, we're assisting with Waha in Constance Lake First Nation, and we've deployed an ambulance there in that community as well. The other thing I want to boast is that we were one of the first services to work with our health unit for swabbing and assessment centers and at homes throughout the district. So how do we do this? How do we maintain updates and et cetera with our staff? So we have our notifications. So Cochrane District, we use certain on the announcement platform to inform the staff of any of the recent outbreaks in the region. We also post through the site news as we receive it from the health unit. So the reason that we use this system is because we have one contracted service, and they're not in our IT department, or they're not necessarily our employees, but we manage the whole service. So we take care of the vehicles, we take care of the equipment, the training, the uniforms, etc. So this way, they get an email notification like this to let them know what's going on in the district. So changes. We've had way too many to mention. They were daily for the first month and a half, but you know, we have to try and keep everybody updated. So I created a course on Certain so that staff can access it and review the latest documents. And they have many different ways to do it. So they can do it directly from the Certain homepage. If they click on the courses, there's the course right there. It may be small and I apologize, but it's just coronavirus information. If they happen to be on the other side, on the e-learning side, I have it set up so that they can either go into the latest announcements under other topics, or they can actually click directly on the course, coronavirus information. So this is something that we've been doing with all of our education since we've been with Certain. Been with Interdev and Certain came out. So what does the course look like? So there's the coronavirus information. What we've included are the links. So these links will bring the staff directly to the website. So it'll pop right up, go to the website that they so choose. I also have the courses that are on the left. So the thing that I want to mention with this is always try and put anything that you're putting into your course, put it into PDF, any sort of documentation, because it's easier for the pop-up windows. And of course, we can check the progress on the staff, see what they've looked at, and keep tracking in that way. And up at the top, we can edit or add. So if you click on the gear icon, the reason I make a course in this format, it's very easy to edit and to add. As soon as you click on edit, you can simply just drag and drop right into the course, and that's it. So some of our previous plans. So with implementation of our paramedic facilitators, we had originally planned to have 4-hour training sessions. We had academic and practical learning throughout the district with 12 students per class. Some of the facing some of the challenges in the days to come. So how will we maintain the physical distancing and education? Well, smaller group sizes, therefore more classes with fewer paramedics per class. Implementation of our paramedic facilitators, which we have throughout all of our bases far and wide. We have 2 full-time in Timmins. We have 2 full-time staff that are paramedic facilitators in the corridor, and we have 1 part-time staff that's paramedic facilitator. We work in collaboration with the base hospital CMEs. So when they do their 4-hour CME, spring rounds and fall rounds because we're a primary care paramedic service, the plan was to have base hospital do their 4 hours, and then we would do a 4-hour as well. So having our secondary base in Timmins base, which is where my office is, and it's also 3 doors down from the base hospital coordinator's office, and we're located in the Integrated Emergency Services Complex building at Northern College, which is newly built, and we've been here for a little over a year and a half now. So we have access to the classrooms here at Northern College and all their equipment. So it makes it very convenient for us to do our training here. We don't have to worry about class size. They've got different size classrooms. So the more people we have, the bigger the room I can get. So I'm not too worried about that. Also implementing our paramedic facilitators to deliver our education, not only here, but throughout the district. In corroboration with the base hospital CMEs. So as I stated, 4 hours of base hospital fall rounds and 4 hours of Cochrane District EMS continuing medical education. What we've also done and what we plan to do is use video education and again, continue our learning through eLearn on Certain. Some more of our future plans. So 4-hour training sessions, academic and practical throughout the district with 10 to 12 paramedics per class. But again, this still may depend on legislation, all depending on group size and what we're allowed to have. Possible second wave or the flu season that's soon to be upon us. Something that we have to remember is that our profession is an extremely hands-on profession. Regardless of the situation of COVID-19 or whatever the future may bring, we need to resume the training and manipulation and demonstration of all of our equipment and skill sets. Something that's never going to change. We're still going to have to do all of the hands-on training that needs to be done. Get the muscle memory, make it so that everybody can do multiple tasks at the same time, things like that. So as I said, I'm not quite as winded as Paul, but here's some of the references, of course, Interdev Technologies and Certain. And if there's any questions.
So I suppose we can take questions as we launch into our discussion. I'm really hoping people are enthusiastic to talk about this. Seamus, if you click on the icon that says screen, then it will stop your screen from sharing and we will be able to see ourselves again. There we go. And anybody who doesn't have a camera on would be great if you turned it on, because we can chat. And okay, Mark's back. All right, good. So as I said, if we need to, we can use the chat window to kind of to handle the comments. But we did, in connection to what Paul and Seamus have done with respect to turning some of their processes electronic, in an attempt to respect social distancing, etc. From Interdev's perspective, we have been working very closely with all of our clients since the onset of COVID, and we've seen many phases, from you guys. So initially it was all hands on deck. You guys worked weekends, evenings, basically we couldn't speak to any of you. And we've seen it sort of evolve to where it feels like it is today, where there's some breathing space, and that you guys seem to have found sort of a new normal. And I think a lot of people are using this term, the new normal, in lots of spaces. But in the context of EMS, I guess the first question really is it going to look different for the foreseeable future? Or, once COVID is sort of behind us and manageable, do you expect that things are going to go back to the way they were?
I would say no. As much as I'd love for them to go back to normal, I believe that there's been a mindset that has been set now, and I think the physical closeness is behind us. It's not going to come back.
Thank you, Seamus. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? Is there
from our perspective,
yeah.
From our perspective, we won't be going back to our old way of doing business. I mean, just with the selection process and how efficient it is, I'm going to be looking at building on that success with Shrag and his team and you guys to see what else that we can digitize or automate, to see, because we just saw it was too much of a benefit to ever go back to legacy.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and I think there's two drivers here. So one is going to be the fact that people are going to need to be sensitive of COVID potentially, forevermore. And then the other one that you're kind of referring to, Paul, is the idea that COVID has put us all, Interdev's no different, into a situation where we were forced, we were in a corner and we were forced to find new practices or protocols or best practices. And so it's served more as an opportunity because we've had to adapt and create new ways of doing business. And now, for that reason, we're not going to go back to the way we were because we've found more effective or more efficient ways of doing things. So does anybody have a comment either on either side of those? you know, the fact that you found best practices, new best practices, and that's why you won't be going back? Or as medical professionals, do you foresee that COVID is going to be a threat enough, either by perception or reality, that we need to continue to exercise new practices?
Hi, it's Jeff. So I would expand on that and say that it's not anything COVID related, in that the two speakers that you had on today, it's a geographic challenge. So for us to have the face-to-face is already a challenge. So and maybe that's why you've got these guys on, is that we have to find new and innovative ways on training our staff, keeping them up to date. And to Seamus's point earlier about being in you know, the first in assessment centers and doing in-home testing, was for the simple fact that a lot of our communities don't have these services. And for us to bring our staff together, whether it's Manitoulin-Sudbury or Cochrane District, means a day's travel for some, and hotel rooms. And so, you know, investing in technology and investing in opportunities where we can train our staff, keep their skills up to date. And one of the things that wasn't touched on from Seamus' side is, you know, as much as we're at Northern College is also very adept to distance education and learning that way. So to be able to utilize a mannequin, say in Hearst, to run a scenario, and then having Seamus monitor them in Timmins, is, you know, something that we will absolutely look at with the college, and how we can ensure that our staff maintain their skills while, you know, and in low acuity stations where they don't get a lot of calls, they don't get to practice their skills. It's even more important that we have the opportunities to do that. And from our end, it's a simple process of where we're actually isolating our staff, but it's a physical distance just for the fact of where they live, right? And so it's helping us where services have not necessarily been exposed to those types of things and have been innovative, and now they have to do that. And it's services with more money than us, and you know, bigger RT departments and those types of things, where hopefully we'll be able to share that information and pass it on. So kudos to you guys for putting this on today, because I think this is one opportunity where we have the opportunity to share that information and to propagate that, right? And saying, hey, what are you doing in York region to ensure that that goes on, right? When I've got no IT department and they probably have like a dozen, if not more. So you know, there's things there where there's opportunity to share, and that's really what we have to capitalize on how we can utilize this moving forward, in not necessarily a COVID base, but in our day-to-day business. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. Very, very good. And so, assuming that to some extent this social distancing you know, protocol is going to be around, what are you doing today to plan for you know, tomorrow, and tomorrow in a broad sense? So what kinds of things are you guys doing at your services to plan to do things differently, basically?
Well, I'll speak on this, Emily. So just kind of expanding on what Jean had to say, and I'm sure Paul will agree, that COVID forced us, and as we discussed a few days ago, that COVID forced us into the technological age, the video age. So now it's definitely all about video. Yes, we still need to get together and assist when we can, and train when we can, but video is the way of the future, and because of the distance that we need to travel, it's so much cheaper and efficient to just do things through video conference and video training. So that's going to be something that we're looking forward to implementing very soon. We have the technology now and the capabilities, so we're looking forward to taking those next steps.
Great, thank you, Seamus. Are there some other services that are you know, taking part in some planning activities, and what do those look like, and what are the important you know, items to consider? Do not make me get up and tap dance. Oh, Rob left. I was just about to call him out. And, oh, Stuart.
Stuart here. Just thinking, we definitely have to figure out how to do things differently and use technology and use video conferencing. But the challenge is getting some of that high fidelity skill set and simulation and still maintaining distance. Paramedics still work in teams. They still are face to face with patients, and it's difficult to simulate that distance using video. Person on a camera is not the same as a person in front of you. You know, there are mannequins out there where you can be remote and have a controller in a different room to simulate patient condition and have paramedics assess and treat. And I'm certainly not smart enough to know whether these things can, how distanced they need to be, but that's a place where we need to go so that you can, and certainly our people in the north would have those challenges already. So being able to, you know, be in an office and control a mannequin in a room in another building, town, you know, municipality away, and give that paramedic the opportunity to really assess patients and react to what they're seeing and feeling. A lot of the job is feeling the patient, and you can't do that through a camera. So it's, that to me is going to be the bigger challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly that will be a big challenge. Gary has a comment. Can you ask the services, how will the fall training sessions change with COVID still on our radar? Will they be doing this remotely? Will they postpone until next year? Thank you, Gary, for the question.
So that's a great question. I think Seamus would answer this very adequately because he already does this stuff. So we're kind of new at the game. And to answer your question, Gary, no, we are going to hold our spring training, fall training sessions. We just got to get creative with it. Certainly we're hoping that some of the restrictions get eased a little bit so we can maneuver a little bit more with our training. We don't know what that looks like. So we'll be looking at folks like Seamus who've been doing remote education to help us navigate those waters. But yeah, our intent now, we canceled our spring sessions. We've got some stuff to catch up on. So I certainly understand that pressure and certainly understand that question. So thank you for that.
So if I could comment on that, I think that was an excellent question in regards to fall rounds, and especially with base hospital. And I think base hospital has some catching up to do when it comes to distance education and how they could do that. Having our paramedics come to a centralized location to run rounds, to run scenarios. And even with our hiring process, you saw that this year for all the paramedic services. And they're saying, well, what used to be 3 days consolidation is now 6 months because we didn't get a face-to-face. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. What is different than having somebody in front of you or having somebody on video or somebody doing a simulation on a mannequin? So I think that there's a couple of services that need to catch up with that. Well, a couple of services. No, base hospital needs to catch up with that, and ensure that we have an opportunity across Ontario to be able to do this. There's a few points that were brought up, and I thought were really interesting, and they got my creative juices flowing. So when we're talking about video conferencing and how we're doing this, there's a really good comment in regards to, you know, patient care and how do we address that? And we still need the hands-on. Do we really? Do we really still need the hands-on, especially in community paramedicine? And if we're doing a home visit, could we have an option in Radius where we're doing a home visit remotely? The visit is taped. We're getting results from our remote patient monitoring. We know that there's a submission out right now from the province. They got $9 million to invest in remote patient monitoring. Well, why wouldn't we link that into Radius and our CP visits so that when you do your CP visits, it's recorded, there's your documentation, right? Like that's, I think that looking at the future and how we can incorporate that, our paramedics may be playing a different role. And I'll go a step further in saying that when it comes to regional training, And the fact that Manitoulin-Sudbury doesn't have a training division, but I do, why couldn't we tap into that? And why couldn't we regionalize some of our training, and that services work together at developing that training and rolling it out? And the challenge that we had before was the face-to-face. It was too challenging for me to send Seamus to Manitoulin-Sudbury or an Espanola or a Chapleau when we already have those travel issues here. But with technology, if we could bring that forward, then maybe we can pool our resources and really improve the quality of the training that we're developing and offering that to the different paramedics in the district. Is there a reason that in Northern Ontario we barely have any ACPs? Yeah, because training them is a freaking nightmare and keeping up their skills is near impossible. So if we could figure that through technology, the rest of Ontario will be the better for it. So just kind of some thoughts as we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose to play the devil's advocate, is anybody doing nothing? Like, does anybody on the call think that this is just going to pass and, you know, maintaining status quo will suffice? No.
I would like to make a comment on what Jean said, which was excellent points. And
Yeah.
just to support Jean, you were talking about, they do microsurgery via video conference, right? So they have the surgeon sitting on the other side of a screen and perform sensitive surgeries. So I certainly see what Jean was saying there, that really, do we need to be in person to evaluate? You know, certainly the exposure and the authenticity of the exposure comes into question. But I think if you know, you train your folks to suspend that disbelief and really get into the scenario, that's actually been proven to work. So,
Right.
so I thought that was a great.
Yes, thank you everybody for contributing. I do have my eye on the clock and I promised a 4 o'clock stop. So I'll wrap this up. Thanks again for the contributions. Obviously, as a software solutions company, we want to stay ahead of where you guys are going to need technology to go. So certainly the doors of communication, we'd love to keep open with you guys if you have suggestions, you know, related to the change in practices that you guys foresee are going to be happening, and ways that Interdev can help to add value on in those new chapters of your lives. Then we would love to hear from you. And thank you again, all of you, for your continued attendance to the webinars. We hope they're helpful. And we are still finalizing our next session's content. So again, if you have insights or feed forward about that, by all means, hit me up. Otherwise, we'll continue to think on that. So everybody, enjoy your day. Thank you so much, and lovely to see you.